who is going to speak about the Open Social APIs. This is the agenda for today's session. So we would appreciate if you can keep the questions towards the end. So we'll have 5 to 10 minutes slot for that. So we'll start off with the introduction to Open Social, what Open Social movement is all about, how we started off on this journey. And then we'll go on to Open Social APIs, which will be covered by Anash. And he'll also talk about Open Social 0.8, which is the latest version of Open Social specification. Then I'll come back and talk about, Open Social containers, what we really mean by Open Social containers, and Shindig, which is the reference implementation which Prasad talked about in the keynote. And we also have Sanjay who is the CTO with Minglebox, and they have been our key partners in this journey in India, and he'll talk about their experiences of adoption of Open Social as a platform for their online property. And in the end, we'll summarize what we covered in this session. So before I start, I'm assuming that all of you have some amount of familiarity with Open Social. So who all have worked on Open Social are familiar with it? Okay, I can say about 50 to 60%. So Jaiku is one of the micro social networking sites which was bought by Google a couple of quarters back. So the founder of Jaiku, he's a sociologist by profession. He's not a technologist, but he has very good understanding of how people really interact offline and online. And he came up with these 5 rules on how a social property online can really become successful in attracting and retaining people and users. So he says that most of the people misconstrue that in any online interaction, people are the key, that they are the nodes of a social graph. But actually, it's the other way around. People are just interactors, right? So the key concept in an online scenario is the object you are interacting with. Just imagine that when you go to YouTube, you look at a video, give review commands, you share a video. You go to flickr.com, you upload your photograph, you share your photograph, or you give comments on your friends' photographs. So I would appreciate if everybody can keep their cell on silent. Thank you. So a photograph or a video is the key object in which context people are interacting online. And the verbs are sharing or viewing or uploading. So he says that what is the object your social property is expecting people to interact in the context of, and what are the verbs using which they'll interact with this object. So these 2 things identify the key interaction point around which you should build your strategy. And then he says that how are these people going to share these objects? So you should have a strategy even around that. So before Flickr started giving individual URLs for each of the photographs, Flickr was not very popular. It really became popular after they started identifying that people need to be able to share the photographs easily. Now that is the rule number 3. And then he says that people need to have some incentive to come online and do social interactions. So what are the gifts? What are the incentives? So you need to have virtual gift giving strategy in place, or some kind of interactions with PayPal or some of the other virtual monetization engines, so that people have some incentive to go online and either accept gifts or give gifts, so that there is a strategy in place in this direction. Now, so to give an overview, that objects, verbs, the sharing of these objects, and some kind of an incentive program will really make your social network popular. Now, a couple of quarters back, I would say around 1.5 years back, a lot of social networking sites, they realized that since objects are the key to stickiness of a user on online properties, so how should they get really good content so that people stick around on their property? And they realized that since everybody might not have the bandwidth, or most of these social networking sites, they were very small companies, startups, so they did not have the bandwidth to create all this content on their own. So they thought that, okay, we want to take help of the developers outside, but they need to have access to the social graph. Now, how is that going to happen? So they came out with the concept of the platform approach. Now, Facebook was the first one to come out with this approach, and very soon, a lot of other players like MySpace, Orkut, they also started thinking about the same strategy. But there was a problem there. A developer who is uh, either an individual developer or belongs to a startup, he has to build applications for one side. Now this guy has exposed some APIs. Now four other websites come online and they have a platform strategy. They expose their own APIs. Now this guy is kind of confused. I want to do monetization using social networking, but I don't have the bandwidth to really port this application on all these properties. That is where OpenSocial really comes into picture. OpenSocial is a foundation by Google, MySpace, Yahoo, and a couple of others, which talks about standardization of this platform approach. So what the foundation or what these folks are saying is that basically we should have a common API which is built around the standards of the web like HTML and JavaScript, and all the players in this space, if they adopt this standard API, the life becomes really very easy, not only for the individual developers but also for the containers who are adopting this standard. So that is what OpenSocial Foundation is all about. So it's an independent organization which has been recently incorporated. So Google, Yahoo, and MySpace are one of the key board members of this organization, but OpenSocial is not Google or MySpace. It's an independent entity where all of us are working together to build a common standard which will make the web more open and more useful, not only for the users but also for the developers and for properties who want to come online and have a social context in which users interact with that property. So as I said, this makes life easy and beautiful for everybody who wants to get into the social space or have a social angle within their online property. So OpenSocial, as you can see, has been around for about a year when we started on this journey, and since then you can see the way user reach has grown. Today we are looking at around 400 plus million users who are using 6,000 plus apps, and we have around 20 to 30 containers worldwide who have either launched or are in the process of launching. So a new container or a new social networking site, for example, wants to come online with a platform approach. So OpenSocial already has built that momentum. So they just need to adopt the platform and carry on with the momentum. The other option is they have their own platform approach, and it's like redoing all the thing which has been done by the foundation since last 2 years. Now for an app developer, if they are building an application for OpenSocial, they can reach so many users through around 30 to 40 containers. So you can see, how much spread this foundation has really given and how much openness this is bringing about in the social web world. So one of the key things OpenSocial Foundation realized was that we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We don't want to come up with proprietary language from start. So HTML, JavaScript was the base on top of which the APIs were built. So we started off on this journey with OpenSocial 0.5 and 0.6, which was primarily JavaScript and HTML based. And when we moved on to 0.8, we realized that there can be scenarios where people are not going and hitting the social endpoints through the browser. People might want to access the social graph on a mobile device. They might want to access social graph through from server to server. So REST APIs are a new part of the specification which will help in getting these scenarios realized, so that all the containers who have adopted OpenSocial, they will be exposing individual REST endpoints, and you can pretty much from any device or even from a server get hit these HTTP endpoints and get the required data. So in the subsequent sessions and in the code labs, we'll actually do code labs around REST endpoints, and we'll also run a couple of samples. Now, OAuth is the authentication framework adopted by OpenSocial in case you want to access another resource online from within a OpenSocial scenario. Like you have an OpenSocial gadget or an app running in a social container, and you want to access contact list on, say, Gmail, or you want to access a photograph on Flickr. So OAuth will let you do that in a manner so that the user does not have to share his password, and he actually grants access on the fly, and container need not ask for a password or store it anywhere. And templates is something new which is coming out in OpenSocial 0.9. So we do realize that not everybody is pretty excited about coding in JavaScript within the browser framework. So we are coming out with template tags with the OpenSocial namespace, which will make coding or building apps even easier. So now I'll hand over to Anash, who will talk about OpenSocial APIs and also compliance framework. Anash.
Hi everyone, my name is Anash and I am with Google Developer Relations. Rashdeep has given us a nice introduction about what OpenSocial is all about and what is the aim behind this movement. Now we will see how to build gadgets using the OpenSocial APIs. So what's there in OpenSocial? For today's talk, I will be covering JavaScript APIs which are already available in 0.6, 0.7 and so on, and REST APIs which have come out in new version 0.8, and templates which we are planning for 0.9, but there is already a prototype version available in Shindig, which is the reference implementation for OpenSocial. Now when we talk about JavaScript APIs, we are talking about two sets of APIs. The first one goes under the OpenSocial.star namespace. This will provide you functions to access the social graph, to retrieve the friend and person information, do some persistence, activity streams, and so on. The other namespace is a gadget.star namespace, which provides you with functionality to do additional things like provide mini messages, interact with Flash, dynamic adjusting of gadget heights, and also a set of utility libraries. And about the version of OpenSocial that is available, 0.7 is the API version that is available very popularly. And 0.8 has now come out of the draft, and many of the containers are implementing it, but they are still in the process of implementing it. And 0.9 is now in the draft phase, but Shindig has already started implementing a part of it. And for specs and release notes, you can always visit opensocial.org to get the latest details. Now, when we start developing gadgets in OpenSocial, the first thing that comes to mind are a set of user roles that we have. The first thing is the owner, who was a person who has installed an application in his homepage, and viewer is a person who is coming in to view this particular application. And these two applications, as you can see, they are connected by the application object. So owner has application, viewer views application, and owner might have his own friends called the owner friends. Viewer might have his own friends called the viewer friends. Now let's have a look at the gadget, because gadgets are nothing other than UTF-8 XMLs, and you have a module node that defines the root of the XML, and under which there are two compulsory nodes, which is the module prefs node and the content node. The module prefs node is where you define the preference of your module, like the title of the module, the author of the module, the features that you would like to use in it. And the content node is a place where you actually define the content, the HTML node. So you'll have a CData node under which you will actually write the JavaScript and HTML corresponding to your gadget. Now this will be taken up by the container and later rendered into an HTML, which will be written in a iframe within the browser page. So you can also see that I use a function called gadgets.util.register_onload handler. This can be used if you have a JavaScript function that you wish to be called once your gadget gets loaded. So think of it as the equivalent of your own load on a web page. Now let's see some of the common things that you will be using the OpenSocial APIs for. The first one is about retrieving person information. and friend information. So the method to do that is to create a new data request object and then add individual sub requests to it. So I used two requests here. The first one is a new fetch person request. The other one is a new fetch people request. And the first one requests the details of the current viewer. The next one requests the details of the viewer friends. And once you do that, you will be using a request.send and you will be providing a callback because send is a asynchronous call. So once the call comes back to you, you can process the data as you can see below. You can use response.get, the key name, .get data to get the fields and then process it. Now one difference that is here in between 0.7 and 0.8 is that in 0.7 we used to access the friend information using predefined constants called viewer friends or owner friends. Now a problem with that was that people wanted to access more social graph context like friend of friends, but you couldn't essentially do that. So in 0.8 we changed it and instead we are using a new ID spec object. We'll be populating it with the viewer details and the group details, and if required you can provide the network distance also, and then you can make the call as usual. Moving ahead, this is the second task that you will be doing, persisting some data and retrieving later. For this you have an API which is called new update person app data request, where you will be storing key value pairs on a per person basis for a gadget. You will be using a new update person request. You will be providing the person ID and the key name and the value which you want to store, and you said request.send. Similarly, you can also fetch the data back. It's quite similar, just that you will be using a fetch person app data request instead of an update person app data request. And once the data comes back to you, you can use data.get to get the fields. After that, you can use the person ID as the first level of ID and then the key name as the second level of ID. So you can think of it as a two-level map. The third activity thing that we'll be doing is about posting an activity. So if you use a site like Orkut, you might have seen that whenever a person updates his profile information, all his friends get the update saying that this person has updated his personal fields, this person has posted a new video. So each of those entries are called activities, and the facility is called an activity stream. And if you use the activity APIs, you can get your gadget to do the same thing. Let's say you have a game and someone uses the game to achieve a high score. You can always post it to the friends saying that this person has used this gadget and obtained a high score. Do you want to beat him? The way to do it is to create a new activity object and populate it with the params like title and body. And once you do that, you can request create activity, and that will create a activity on the friends list. The one thing about here is that it's a request create activity, so which means that the container might decide to honor some of the personal privacy settings that the other person may have. So there's no guarantee that it might end up receiving. But it's dependent on the setting that the receiving person has set on his home page. Now let's have a look at the REST protocol. Now REST protocol is something new that came out in 0.8 version of the APIs. The reason why we introduced is because there were a lot of requirements where the third-party server might want to synchronize itself to the social network and access the social graph. A typical example would be that you are writing a game gadget on your machine, but on Orkut, but you somehow want to synchronize it with your third-party server to exchange some data in between. Or think of it or a mobile application which wants to access the social graph without actually writing a gadget. For that, what you have are the REST APIs, where you will be making calls to HTTP endpoints and getting data using HTTP GET or updating using POST. You can use a language of your choice like Java, PHP, Python or anything. And this is available at opensocial.org. You can take a look at the specs. Another feature I would like to discuss is about templates, which Rajdeep mentioned. The reason why we are introducing templates is because writing JavaScript is not very intuitive to all the developers around. So instead we can use templates to use markup and make the gadgets. There are several advantages that come out because you use templates. The first thing is that you don't have to render the JavaScript or run it all the time. You can predefine them and keep them in the server and serve them out as required. The second thing is it's very easy to have a standard look and feel across multiple containers. The third thing is that you can ensure that the JavaScript that is generated is sane because you are the one who are generating it based on the templates. So you are no longer restricted to running it in an iframe. You can decide it to render inline within a div. And this is part of point 9, and Shindig already has a reference implementation of it. And I'll also like to add a note on the compliance, because there are a lot of containers who are implementing it, and you want to write gadgets that goes across in multiple containers. But each container might be in a different level of implementation. It might have bugs. It might have a partial implementation of API for some reason. So how do you make sure that all the containers are implemented the standard properly? Or if you are a container, how will you ensure that your container has implemented everything properly? So the answer to that is an OpenSocial gadget available at opensocial.resources/wiki/compliance test. But it's a gadget which you can download and run it against a container of your choice. So there are a lot of test suites like people test suite and person test suite, persistent test suite, to see if the APIs are behaving according to the standard. So this screen shows the gadget running in Orkut. So all the black entries are the ones that the person didn't run. The green ones are the ones that the person actually ran and the test passed. The orange ones are with the warnings. If there are failures, it will be shown in red. There's also another place which is called the OpenSocial Compliance Metrics, which is an application available on AppSpot. It's opensocialcompliance.appspot.com. You can go here and add a list of containers that you are interested in and run the test to see which all APIs are supported, and you can compare multiple containers to see the level of implementation they are gone at. All the green ones show the tests that passed, the red ones show the tests that have failed. And now I will hand over back to Rajdeep, who will talk about OpenSocial containers.
Thank you, Anash. So when we talk about social networking, most of the people construe this as traditional social networks, which are more informal, and you are basically using them to hang out with your friends online, like Orkut, MySpace, Facebook. But social context can also be used in a lot of other scenarios, like personal dashboards. How many of you use iGoogle? Oh, cool. So iGoogle is a perfect example of personal dashboard. In fact, iGoogle has a sandbox, which is open social container. So if you go to sandbox.igoogle.com, so it's actually an open social container which is waiting to go live. So in that case, what happens is the dashboard itself becomes the owner. So you are always the viewer. Now all your friends will always be the viewer. Now if they log in, they become the owner. Now in this case, the scenario is that this dashboard can run. Traditionally, all the personal dashboards used to be nothing but bunch of widgets or bunch of tables, which can collate all the data you need, like stock quotes and say your email, your calendar, and all those things in one place. But over a period of time, people realize that there is a social context, and you can actually combine social context in a personal dashboard. Now, the way things are going, some people might use your traditional contact list, say in Gmail, as the social graph. So again, it depends on what kind of personal dashboard it is, or it can have its own social graph built in. So another area which can also become a social site is, say, online gaming. So I was talking to one of the online gaming industries company in India, and they in fact had all the bells and whistles of a social site. Like they had a personal profile, they had activity stream, they had a list of friends which you could add, and so in their case, the social object was a game. So they wanted to set up an online community so that people come onto their property, log in, their friends also log in, and they play online. So any online property which has an object which can have an online interaction can become a social site. So online gaming sites, so online video review sites, any movie review site, even potentially all the job sites, they can become a social container. And another area where social web is going and creating its impact is CRM systems. So a lot of times CRM deals are made using informal contacts or contacts which you had previously from your previous companies. So all the traditional CRM concepts like you need to have all the customer base inside and all the salespeople who are dealing with that particular customer, they need to be attributed or added to that CRM site. No longer might hold true in all the scenarios. For example, Salesforce.com, they realized pretty early that social web can be a very powerful tool to be used in a CRM context. So even Oracle, they are implementing social web as part of their Oracle CRM suite. So it's another area which is waiting to get explored, and very soon you'll see the social context and social web going and doing inroads into this area. So as I talked about, 3 or 4 scenarios. So any normal site like an email site can also potentially become a social site. So open social is nothing but a special kind of gadget. So the road which people take to becoming a social container is that they first start off with becoming a gadget container. Because once you're a gadget container, then along the way you can think about social scenarios which you might want to add. So any online property which might have a social context waiting to be explored somewhere down the line might want to start off with becoming a gadget container and then become a social container down the road. Now, as an online property, if you want to become an open social container, one thing which you might want to do is that how do I really go about this path? So one option is that you take this spec and implement it on your own, both on the client side as well as the server side. Now I'll talk about in the next few slides in a lot more details what I really mean by the client and the server side, but there is a simpler answer to that. So Open Social Community, they have invested a lot of time and effort in building a reference implementation called Shindig. So it's an Apache Incubator project, which you can basically go and visit incubator.apache.com/Shindig and you'll see this project. So it has an implementation both in Java and PHP, which you can download using their public SVN, build it locally and integrate it with your site. So in a couple of months, you can actually become a open social compliant container. So I'll talk about Apache Shindig in the next few slides. So Apache Shindig, as I said, it's an open source software which has been built by the community for the community. So it can be downloaded and used under the Apache license. And it's currently being used by most of the open social containers like Orkut, MySpace, Ning, High5. 99% of the containers who have adopted open social have used Shindig as the backend engine for both gadget rendering and social data rendering. And since it's open source and the licensing is under the Apache License Agreement 2.0, so you can pretty much, legally also you can review the license agreement and use it without any complications in the future. And the goal of Shindig is to get people started on the open social road as fast as possible. So actually we are aiming for something like within a few hours you should have downloaded Shindig and you should be able to integrate both the back end and the front end. But we definitely are some way on that road, and in a few months time this might actually become the reality. In the code lab today actually we have built installers for Shindig, so you will be able to get up and running with Shindig in a few minutes. So you'll see the power of open source being used to really create an engine for the social web. So what is Shindig behind the doors? So it's basically divided into two important pieces. One is the gadget server and other one is the social server. So gadget server is, so since all the gadgets are nothing but XML files with HTML content embedded inside. So somebody has to really go and convert this XML and inline all the CSS and JavaScript and then send it back to the browser, right, for it to be rendered. Now this is actually done by the gadget server, which is part of the server side of Apache Shindig. So once this conversion from XML to HTML has happened, the server throws this HTML back to the browser. So this is rendered inside an iframe of the gadget. Now the open social APIs, which you had basically put in your gadget, they'll be executed as in step 2. Now these APIs will go and hit the social server on the server side again, and they'll actually go to the persistent store, extract the social graph, and then go back to the browser and render that social graph. It can be either your friend list, or it can be activities or app data which you might want to update or view or delete. So this diagram is a deeper dive into this architecture. So I'll just spend a few minutes on this. So Shindig, as I said, it has a reference implementation both on the Java side and the PHP side. And the implementation was initially done in Java and then ported to PHP. So you'll actually have the Java implementation based on the servlet stack and one-on-one mapping in PHP. Since PHP itself by design does not have the servlet stack, so you'll actually have a PHP class created called HTTP servlet. You'll have a PHP class called gadget rendering servlet, and so on. So, but I'll restrict my discussion to the Java side, which looks more intuitive. And since in India, people are pretty familiar with Java, so we thought that Java stack would make more sense for this presentation. So as I mentioned, it's like bunch of servlets put together, which depending on the scenario in which the open social server side is being used. So we have around 7 servlets in all. Now, 2 important servlet scenarios which we are going to concentrate on here is, one is the rendering aspect, the other is the social graph aspect. So as I mentioned before, that gadget server is the server part which actually converts XML into HTML. So this pipeline which you see here actually is doing that. So all the calls, once you added your gadget to your site, right, and you want to see it, it actually goes and hits gadget rendered servlet. So this guy knows that this gadget requires these many features. These are the JavaScript files. So those features are, so each feature is not like, example of a feature is a view, or OpenSocial is itself a feature in a JavaScript, in gadget framework. So all those JavaScript files have to be inlined before they are sent back to be rendered on the browser, right? So this inlining and loading of JavaScript files is basically done by this pipeline, this bunch of classes which you see here. So once that inlining has been done and the HTML goes to the browser side, it again comes and hits here. So this box which you see in black is basically the sample social container, which is part of the reference implementation. Now there are 3 main services which it implements. The people service to basically serve people related calls like getting list of friends, getting attributes of the person. Then there is the activity service if you want to create an activity or update an activity or delete an activity. So activity service interface basically provides that API. So it's actually called OpenSocial SPI, server level interfaces. And so data services for the app data requests. So your sample implementation actually implements all these 3. So any social networking site which wants to take Shindig and customize it and to integrate with their backend, they would pretty much take this black box out and replace it with their own implementation. So the reference implementation itself is file-based. Earlier it used to be XML file, now it's JSON-based. So it's a very simple JSON file which we'll take a deeper look at in the code lab. So you'll pretty much replace this with your MySQL instance or Oracle instance, wherever your social graph is. And a couple of other handlers which for the REST API call, and converters which will convert to JSON or XML depending on what kind of request you're sending from the REST endpoints. So so in this diagram we actually see 2 converters, but there are actually 3 converters now. So we have JSON, XML, or ATOM converter. So this social or the social server which you see out here, it can either be you can actually go and hit this social server from your gadget, or you can hit this social server directly using REST API calls. So in both the cases it comes and hits the same place. So that is why you have these converters. So these converters are not really used XML and atom converters are not used if you are accessing the social graph from your gadgets. But if you are using REST endpoints, as you'll see in the some of the code labs, so depending on what format you want the output back, you can actually go to XML converter or an atom converter or a JSON converter. So this gives a bigger picture of what the client side looks like. So Shindig also has a pretty heavy, a client side. Like 30% of the code actually resides in JavaScript, because the APIs are JavaScript based, and gadget, the concept of gadget itself and the gadget container is actually a client side concept. So we have three main containers which we need to look at. So since OpenSocial is nothing but a special kind of gadget, right? So it has to run within the gadget container framework. So we have one gadget container which actually takes all the calls which are from the gadget namespace, like what Anash talked about. And all the REST calls or the social calls go to the RESTful container. So OpenSocial container is nothing but an abstract implementation. Realization of that is the RESTful container. So all the API calls which Anash talked about, like new fetch person request, creating a new activity and all, they will ultimately go and hit this guy. This guy will create a new XML HTTP request using gadgets.io namespace, and then it will go and hit the server. So the server is what we talked about in the previous slide, this guy here. Okay. So this is like a schema diagram of OpenSocial namespace on the client side. So you can see that everything revolves around the person object. So you have, a person can have 0 or more activities, he can have 0 or more emails, which can be home email or work email and so on. So it's not a very complex schema, but having this in the perspective helps in coding for the gadgets. If you have this schema diagram in front of you and you understand the relation between various objects. So this brings us towards a section where Sanjay, who is with Minglebox, he's going to talk about the journey of OpenSocial adoption. So I'll hand it over to Sanjay. Thank you, Rajiv. Yeah. So you can use this paper. Use the next slide.
Sure. Thank you, Rajiv. Brief introduction about myself and Minglebox. I'm Sanjay, work with Minglebox. Minglebox is, for some of you who don't know, is India's largest campus and education network, connecting millions of students with potentially thousands or tens of thousands of education providers. Let it be the MBA Institute or studying abroad options or various vocational courses. So we adopted OpenSocial some time back. Actually, we started this journey pretty much along with the beginning of OpenSocial. So I think I'll just talk briefly about why OpenSocial. Since Minglebox as a social networking and campus networking company was looking at opening up the Minglebox platform for which will enable us to open up the innovation to our users. And I'll talk briefly about that, in terms of how we are sort of trying to extend the reach through this. We were looking at that in any case. And there came along OpenSocial, open standards, open source, the right one, run anywhere paradigm, which sort of helps you to leverage the existing applications and the existing developer community's work, and which results in decreased time to market for us. Now, briefly, let me talk about the Minglebox platform and sort of how we have gone ahead and adopted Shindig, which is a reference implementation from Google. Now, actually more from OpenSocial. When we started, Shindig was in its very early days. The reference implementation was practically the in-memory container, which was being used for testing purposes, and there was very little that was available. And sort of we have learned along with the OpenSocial community, and we've built some features which sort of were later made available within the Shindig implementation, and sort of we're trying to catch up. now. So Minglebox platform, highly distributed, customizable. It had all the viral elements which were needed. Has a rich tag library which helps us to templatize various features. And as I said, all the elements needed for the open social container were already available. So this is one thing which I would say is sort of very important for any company, any group, any team to adopt open social, is to look at what kind of features from open social you're going to use and make sure your application, your platform already has sort of most of those built in, and that is when you can realize what Rajdeep talked about. Within a few hours you'll be up and running with Shindig. In terms of, so this is the layer that we had to build to really connect the Minglebox platform with open social. And later on, some of these have been incorporated into Shindig as well. So the gadget server, which is of course, from our perspective, was the biggest thing that Shindig offered us. Building the gadget server. Can everybody hear me? Building the gadget server from scratch would be a big task, and I know some companies have done that, but this was a great help from Shindig. The app data server, social data server, and an extension which I'll talk about a little bit later, the community data server, and all the messaging services which include activities, the external, internal mailing, and public and private messaging as well. It'd be good if if you guys have any questions, just ask. That'll make the discussion more interactive, and I'll be able to sort of also talk a little bit more about how we've done it. So as I was saying, Shindig, now I can say it's a great starting point, and probably the only option that most people would have to save time. It gave us the gadget server, gadget rendering, and a core JavaScript layer which was needed for communication between the client and the servers. Also the reference implementation, the JavaScript open social container, which later came into existence in Shindig, which is now JSON-based JavaScript container. So we sort of started with, as I said, we started with the very early implementation. So we still have sort of connections with that. We have our own JavaScript container, which sort of extended the initial implementation of Shindig. We have the full implementation of 0.7 APIs as of now. We're still trying to catch up with the 0.8, primarily the REST API is part of it. Bulk of the data exchange is XML-based between client and server. And I'll just talk briefly about all the different aspects of open social, specifically with I think the key elements in open social are people, APIs, the relationships between people, the activities, messaging, and the persistence. So just to give you a sense of how things are done within our container. For people, we have owner and viewer information available, and we've also extended it to make any arbitrary user information available. Now, the reason for that is, another side of it. So we've played on both sides of the table. We've been an app developer first, and sort of extending or providing some of the useful, interesting, fun apps to users across different containers. And we've also implemented the containers. So we sort of felt that at various stages, the need to have access to different users on the client side was very high. So we extended that, and so from people perspective, you can access owner information, viewer information, and any arbitrary user information. Now, obviously, the same access rules will apply as the ones that are available on profile pages. So if I have made my profile accessible only to my friends, then only my friends can get my information, and so on and so forth. We have a limited set of fields that are exposed right now, and this is how a typical XML request would look like from the client side. As I said, in everything, the bulk of the communication is XML driven. Now, there's some optimizations we've done around this, and I'll talk about that in the next slides. With respect to relationships, Again, Open Social Spec as of now exposes one relationship type, which is friends, and obviously there are other decorators around it, which you can say the network distance is one. We're also looking at extending it to other types of relationships, which will be more useful within our context. For example, members of a community or a campus, readers of different articles or blogs, and so on and so forth. A quick look at how the activities implementation is done. We have limited support of HTML, so some of the tags will be stripped out before they get rendered. Also, we have limited support for templates and tags. So if you can see, if you can see, you can embed simple tags in between the activity streams, so that you don't have to fetch all the information on the client side or on the server side if you're using REST APIs. And these tags will be expanded to the appropriate values before getting rendered. And this is how typically an update would get rendered on any of the activity pages. In terms of messaging, we have again, based on the spec, we have exposed all types of messaging. There is internal messaging, there is public messaging, which we call on Minglebox chit chats. There is external email support, notifications with alerts. Again, limited HTML support, similar to what we have on the activity stream side. Again, on the persistence side, we have full support of user data and app data persistence. And I'll talk briefly about how we've tried to extend it, instead of me talking more about how Shindig has done it or what is the spec saying. It'll make more sense. I think a couple of things on performance. As I was saying, for accessing the social data, we have done a few things which are a little different from other containers that I've seen. We of course have a server-side cache for most frequently used social data. But on the client side, we're trying to cache this information and try to share this information across apps, so that we don't have to fetch this information again and again. So it's like building a small database on the client side, which can be sort of accessed and processed, and based on what kind of information user is looking for, an application is looking for, can be served out. So there's there are JavaScript files which sort of get streamed and get cached for some amount of time. And obviously, there's a downside of it, with respect to if data gets updated, it may not get refreshed for a small period of time. But this definitely, we've seen a huge performance boost with that. Another thing that we're trying to do, this is work in progress, is to use app data for profile page rendering. So now, one of the challenges we saw was, if you had to render a lot of applications on the profile pages, it was very challenging. It takes a lot of time, and it can, it can even freeze up the browser at times because a lot of context information gets downloaded. So we're experimenting with this. We try to use the persistence data, which can be updated at various points in time by the app, to store the view information of the profile of different users. Now there are security issues around it, and we're still tackling those. Another thing which we've borrowed from the later version of Shindig, which is URL rewriting for serving cached content, and for app developers, it may be hard to have fast, scalable storage solutions. So we basically cache all the JavaScript, CSS, and images, and rewrite the URLs appropriately. Some of the extensions, I'm sorry, the first one being the most relevant to us, which is the owner abstraction. And I think Rajdeep touched upon that in iGoogle context, for example, where the owner is actually the container. Now, what we're saying is owner could be anything, any container entity within our system. It could be a user, it could be a group, it could be a campus, it could be a page, or anything else which can hold content within it. And based on what kind of owner it is, different kind of information can be exposed. Now, obviously, Open Social today is a little restrictive in that sense of definition of what a user is really, or an owner is. I mean, owner is always associated with the user. So the information that gets associated with the user is well defined. But if we have to extend that, we'll have to extend the spec a little bit, and somewhat of that what we're looking at as of now for ourselves. And once it gets stabilized, obviously, contributing it back to the open social community. An example of that is, if you're trying to fetch community members, in the group ID field of OpenSocial 08, you could specify members instead of friends. The other one is, what I talked about earlier, basically how can we store and retrieve profile box data or profile box view HTML per se. So again, a simple extension, which basically addition of a new update profile view data request, which is nothing but a save user app data request, and gets done. There are some security issues around this. We're trying to work around that. I guess that's it. Yeah. I think our experience overall with working with Shindig has been very good. I think we've seen Shindig gets updated very, very frequently. We've had most of the time, as I said, we started very early, so before we could think and implement some feature which was missing or lacking in Shindig, we saw that Shindig update sort of already had that. We're still trying to catch up with the latest version of Shindig, but I'm sure it's a very valuable piece of work, and I think all of those of you who want to implement open social containers, Shindig is a very good starting point. Thanks. Any questions? Client-side caching. So basically, what we do is we pre-construct JavaScript files based on the viewer and the owner information, and we stream those files with the appropriate cache headers set in the JS files. So these files just get cached, and so whenever an application is trying to access, let's say, viewer friends information, the client-side container, the JavaScript container, just accesses this JS file or the contents of this JS file and just processes it and gives it back to you. So instead of us trying to make a call to the server and give it back, we found that this worked much better, especially if you're coming from. Yes. I don't think I understand that. This is for accessing social data, which you cannot update through the applications. It only gets updated if you change your social graph, or if you make new friends, the information gets changed. If your friends update their profile information, for example, the headshots, it gets changed, and stuff like that. I don't know if I answered your question, but
yeah, maybe if it's not clarified, you can take it offline with him. Thank you, Sanjay.
Actually, also there was another slide on this, which I wanted to maybe I'll just talk about it. It's not available publicly right now. What we've also done is there is a developer extension of sorts. What we've done is we've combined the concept of a sandbox and the live site, much like, or a little like, the Facebook approach for letting developers add new applications. This is a developer application which is by default available on this in the directory. It has controlled access, but once you install the app, you will be able to sort of work in a protected private mode, which is like a sandbox, and basically do everything that is needed. The only thing is the social graph, social context will not be attached with all the activities that are performed through this app till it gets approved. In short, it's not available yet, but it will be available soon, and that will be the approach that we'll take. So as I said, there is no sandbox. It's in production environment only, and it will be a developer app, and it will be available very soon.
Okay, so I'll quickly summarize because we have, I think, overshot the time. So we talked about 4 main things. What is Open Social Movement all about? Making the web more social and open for users, app developers, and containers, all 3 key players. And then the current version of OpenSocial spec is 0.8, which just which is just out, and it has new scenarios based on REST APIs. Then developers can choose from all these containers and start building apps today. So all these containers have sandboxes and go live environments as well. And very soon I'm hoping Minglebox will also have one. And so Apache Shindig is a starting point on the container side for people who want to bring their properties online with social scenarios. And with that, I'll bring this presentation towards an end. And these are some of the resources which you guys can look at, both from Open Social Foundation perspective, specification perspective, as well as samples and sandboxes of all the key containers which are live today. So we'll take 2 or 3 questions before we wind up. Yeah, it will be uploaded by tomorrow. Okay. Yeah.
I have a question about Arcot.
Uh-huh.
Suppose I write an application which I want it to be installed in Arcot.
Mm-hmm.
And afterwards, when the user comes in, when they try to start interact,
Mm-hmm.
will it show up the list of friends?
Mm-hmm.
And will the container be able to access the contact details of that particular user?
So OAuth is the scenario you're talking about. Say I have 5 friends, and each of those friends have accounts in Gmail and Yahoo, and you want to access their contact list, right? So first of all, those users have to give you access to access their accounts.
True. But assume they give the access.
Yeah, that scenario is possible.
The container will somehow get to know the contact details.
On its own, it cannot. See, as a gadget developer, first of all, those, in fact, that scenario can be more applied if you own a Yahoo mailbox and from within an app, within the Orkut app, you come and then the OAuth window opens and you give access to this particular OAuth request, and those contact lists comes back. But for your friends, I'm not sure how that implementation will happen because your friends have to agree to give the contact list on the fly. So maybe it can be combined with an activity stream. So you can send this request to your friend who can then accept it and allow this request to be rerouted back to your app. So maybe a combination of OAuth and activity stream, I would say. But if you own both Yahoo Mail contact list and you are inside Orkut and viewing this app, so that scenario is pretty straightforward. Other scenario will have to be routed through the person who owns that mailbox. Okay. So we would be winding up the session now. We're running out of time. I mean, yeah. So Kaha is a separate open source project by Google, and it's basically a JavaScript validation engine which subsets JavaScript into secured JavaScript using Kahita and all. So OpenSocial has an integration with it by default, but it's not part of Open Social Foundation. It's a separate project, but we do provide integration.
So it's mandatory.
No, it's not mandatory. It's additional security for container provider to filter out malware on the JavaScript side.
Shindig provides that as an option.
Yeah, as an option.
You can turn it on or turn it off.
So they have a checkbox on the main page when it loads. So you can enable Kaha or disable Kaha. But most of the containers, it's optional for them to either adopt it or not to adopt it. Okay, thanks guys.